Good late afternoon, early evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending our joint meeting of the Royal Society and the Academy of Royal Society of South Africa and Academy of Science of South Africa presentation. This one, people could perhaps just mute themselves, please. This is by Professor Jane Carruthers, Fellow of the Royal Society of South Africa, and Vincent Carruthers, and the title is Combining Astronomy with Ancient Africa, a Scientific Legacy, and it's Toppy's Hook Restoration and Conservation Project. Professor Carruthers has taught in the Department of History from 1980 until her retirement as a research professor in 2012. She's a pioneer of environmental history in South Africa, and she has authored a number of books and around 30 chapters in books, as well as more than 30 articles in scholarly journals. Her doctoral thesis, The Kruger National Park, A Social and Political History, from 1995, has become a standard reference work. She was the founding chair of the board of the Rachel Carson Center for Environmental and Society at the Ludwig Maximilian University, Munich, and past president of the International Consortium of Environmental History Organization and past president of the South African Historical Society. She was the recipient for the Distinguished Scholar Award of the American Society for Environmental History in 2008, and the first African to be so awarded. Vincent Carruthers, who's a member of the Royal Society of South Africa, is the author of several publications on wildlife conservation, zoology and heritage, including the Magaliesberg Cradle of Life, the story of the Magaliesberg and the Cradle of Humankind, and also the editor of The Wildlife of South Africa, a field guide to the animals and plants of the region. From 2006 to 2015, he initiated the declaration of the Magaliesberg as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And he's also received the Chancellor's Medal from Northwest University in 2013 and the University of the Witwatersrand Gold Medal in 2016, as well as numerous other awards. He has been CEO at WISA, chairman of BirdLife South Africa, and member of the Northwest Parks and Tourism Board. So we're in for a really nice time. Professor Jane Carruthers has also been a council member of the Royal Society of South Africa for many years. She's done lots of good things for us, and she has published lots of interesting things under the auspices of the Royal Society of South Africa, and has an article on a city in Portugal coming up in our next newsletter. And I tried to pronounce that and I chickened out. Sorry. We are in for, I think we're in for a really entertaining talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my stuff and invite you to put up your presentation, and go ahead, please.
Thank you
very much and welcome.
Thank you. No, we were all right as we were. That has to go.
Slideshow from
beginning.
From the beginning. There we go. Right.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Leslie, for that very generous introduction, and welcome to everyone who has joined us online. It's lovely to see so many people, and I do hope that what we're going to talk about this afternoon is of a wide interest and perhaps to many of you. Today, we're going to explain a collaborative project on science heritage. between the Tshwane University of Technology, known as TUT, and the Magaliesburg Association for Culture and Heritage, usually abbreviation to MACH, M-A-C-H. The purpose of the project has been to draw attention to two adjacent scientific heritage sites on property that belongs to this university, and to encourage the means of restoring and using them in some way. Now, Vincent and I initiated this project about 2 years ago because we realized that the sites presented an unmatched opportunity for heritage conservation and tertiary education. So those are the two institutions that are involved, and the two sites are shown here on the screen. One of them is the Leiden University Observatory Southern Station that operated for 25 years from the late 1950s to the late 1970s. And during this time, it contributed important astronomical information, but it also recalls a historically important period of international collaboration between South Africa and the Netherlands. The other, on the right of your screen, is an archaeological dig on an early Iron Age settlement, first excavated in 1973. It's been dated to between AD 350 and AD 650, that's 1600 years ago. It is highly significant because it provides the best and the unique insights into farming, livestock keeping, metalworking, and the general lifestyle of the earliest Black communities, Bantu-speaking communities, to settle in what is now South Africa. How these two totally different types of scientific endeavor came to be linked is a fascinating tale that we are going to recount to you now. So the project had definite objectives. And I'd like to make it clear from the start that Vincent and I are neither astronomers nor archaeologists. Our purpose has been, and it is this evening, purely to emphasize the importance of the history of science and its communication, not the details of either science in itself. If anything, we make a plea for the better knowledge of our country's scientific past and the importance of understanding it, caring for it, and funding it. And we hope that a productive discussion on these topics will follow after our presentation. There are three objectives that we set around about the time we started this. Firstly, to act as catalysts for a process of restoring and making positive use of these heritage sites. Secondly, to use them as examples of the importance of science history. And thirdly, to use the unique location of these sites on the property of a technical university as an educational tool. So what you're about to hear is a history project, not a science one. Now, Toppieshoek. The two sites are located on the Tshwane University of Technology's rural campus. Their main campus is in Pretoria, which is seen in the foreground of this picture next to Hartbeespoort Dam. It's a 50-hectare part of a farm that was expropriated for Hartbeespoort Dam in 1923, but lies above the water level. And for those listening who are not familiar with this part of the world, Hartbeespoort is about 70 kilometers north of Johannesburg and 35 west of Pretoria. The property is currently used by the university as a venue for student outdoor training, and we think the name Toppieshoek is a sort of English Afrikaans hybrid, meaning the upper corner of the flooded farm. We're presenting this in 4 parts. The introduction, which I've now done, and we can move to the second section, and Vincent will explain the importance of the Leiden University Astronomical Observatory. I'll then discuss the archaeological early Iron Age site in the third section, and Vincent will conclude with a look at what has been achieved and what lies ahead. So, over to Vincent.
Thank you, and good evening to everybody from me. And in particular, I'd like to thank and welcome any of our colleagues from the Netherlands who may be watching, several of whom, as you will hear, played important roles in the story. This picture is the historic astronomical site, the old Leiden University Observatory Southern Station overlooking Hartbeespoort Dam. And the photograph was taken in the 1960s by Professor Jan Willem Pell, one of the astronomers there at the time. The two white buildings on the left each housed a telescope, and there is a third one that's out of sight in this particular picture. And those steel roofs rolled out on the elevated rails that you can see that look like a sort of pergola thing, and those exposed the instruments to the sky. On the right are some of the staff housing, and the archaeological site that Jane will be talking about later is in the trees beyond these buildings. Our story, though, begins more than a century ago when the old Transvaal Meteorological Station, which was established in Johannesburg after the Anglo-Boer War, acquired a 9-inch telescope in 1910 and was renamed the Union Observatory with Robert Innes as its director. Innes was an extraordinary man. He was born in Scotland. He had no formal qualifications whatsoever. He left school at the age of 12, and he worked first in Australia and then at the Royal Observatory in Cape Town. But he built a huge reputation for his knowledge of binary and pulsating stars. I forget the number that he actually discovered, but they were in the several thousands that he observed. He also, when he became better known, he corresponded widely and collaborated extensively with other astronomers all around the world. And one of these was Willem de Sitter, the professor of astronomy at Leiden University and the director of their prestigious observatory. Leiden University awarded Innes an honorary doctorate in 1923, and that actually was the only academic degree that he ever had. And when he went to the Netherlands to receive this doctorate, he and de Sitter came to an agreement whereby Leiden astronomers would use the Union Observatory to observe the southern sky, while South African astronomers could use the prestigious and the magnificent facilities at Leiden University. So under this arrangement, many Dutch astronomers started coming to South Africa. The first Leiden astronomers who visited the Union Observatory in Johannesburg used the now renowned Franklin Adams telescope. It's the picture you see on the right. It's a curious looking thing. Pardon me, it looks like a coffin bolted onto something made out of a Meccano set, but it was state of the art in its day. It had a unique 10-inch 10-inch wide angle lens that had been made by Britain's top optician, Dennis Taylor. It projected a sharp image of an 8-degree arc of the sky onto a 12-inch glass plate at the back of the telescope, which is essentially a box camera. It was built for John Franklin Adams, who was a wealthy amateur, in the 1900s, specifically to chart the entire sky. And in 1903, it was brought to Cape Town to photograph the southern sky, but the results were a failure. So Franklin Adams sent it out again in 1909, this time to Johannesburg, where the sky was clearer. The lens was apparently so valuable that on the passage out, it was booked into a passenger cabin on the ship, where it was bolted to the floor to prevent damage if the ship got into bad weather. On his death, Franklin Adams bequeathed this telescope to the Union Observatory, but it had had an extraordinary career even then. By the time the Dutch started using it, it had made quite a name for itself. As mentioned, its main function was to chart the whole sky, and that was completed in 1915. It could photograph stars as dim as a magnitude 15. For astronomers listening, they'll know how dim that is. That's very, very almost invisible stars. They're so dim. Then in 1910, it took some of the most spectacular photographs of Halley's Comet that visited our part of the solar system at that time. Patrick Moore said that these were the best photographs that were ever taken of the comet. And then in 1915, Robert Innes used 2 of its photographic plates taken 5 years apart, and by comparing them and blinking one against the other, he was able to discover Proxima Centauri, the closest star to Earth. Now, during its long, I think about 70 years of operation, the Franklin Adams telescope took tens of thousands of glass plates, photographic glass plates, and about 12,000 of them are now being digitized and curated by Alec Jamieson at the Department of Physics at WITS. And then I understand a whole lot more are at Leiden University, where Professor Jan Lub is curating them there. These plates and the telescope itself are valuable relics of the scientific past. But despite its illustrious pedigree, the Franklin Adams telescope was not suitable for the precise observations and the spectrography of variable stars, which is what Leiden astronomers were really wanting. So in 1929, after spending some time at the Union Observatory, Einar Hutsprung, I hope that's the correct pronunciation of his name, Deputy Director of the Leiden Observatory, commissioned Grubb Parsons of Newcastle, one of the finest telescope builders at the time, to build this double telescope purpose-made for Leiden's work in South Africa. It was a 16-inch double-barreled or double telescope mounted on one frame, partly funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and thus called the Rockefeller Twin Astrograph. Hertzsprung was a renowned astronomer even then, and he was co-author of the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, which I believe is still used by astronomers to determine the evolutionary stages of stars. It plots the size and luminosity of stars on a chart, which gives them an indication of the age and stage of the star's life cycle. His specifications with this telescope were extremely demanding. It was almost 10 years before Grubb Parsons delivered it to Johannesburg. And even then, the lenses fell short of Hertzsprung's specs. And the new ones were ordered from Carl Zeiss in Germany. But that was in 1939, bad year to be doing business with Germany because Second World War intervened. The telescope was in fact used in Johannesburg during the war, but the Zeiss factory was of course out of action during the war in Jena. And after the war, Jena fell into East Germany, and there was some difficulty in getting those lenses, and they were eventually brought to Johannesburg, delivered to Johannesburg in 1949. That's almost 20 years after Hertzsprung had actually commissioned the telescope. And by then, Johannesburg had grown into a sprawling city and light pollution had become a serious problem to astronomers. So Leiden looked for somewhere where the skies were darker. The Union Observatory was given that vacant state land that Jane mentioned that had been expropriated for Hartbeespoort Dam, but was high enough to be above the water. And the Franklin Adams telescope was moved there in 1953, and the Rockefeller Twin Astrograph followed in 1957. Here you can see it being erected at that time in 1957. Although technically the property was still an annex of the Union Observatory, the site was nominally, formally designated the Leiden University Observatory Southern Station, and it was used pretty well exclusively by Leiden astronomers from then on. And at that time, in 1957, Leiden installed a third telescope there. It was the highly specialized instrument called the light collector, and it directed all the light from a single source, that's a one star or perhaps a double star, into a photometer. And it also had other advanced capabilities, such as computer-driven rapid slewing that points from one star to another fairly quickly across the arc of the telescope's vision. Electronic spectrography had advanced considerably during the war, and Theodore Valraven, the director of the Southern Station, was a leader in that field. He designed a fine 5-color spectrometer that allowed multiple wavelengths to be recorded simultaneously. That's him in the bottom left-hand corner of the photograph. It was Valraven's wife, Joanna, who actually built most of this high-tech instrumentation, and it was maintained and managed on the site by David Stevenson, who now lives in retirement in Knysna. We've met him and he has helped us with this project, but sadly, his notes from the time at the station were destroyed when his house burned down in the Great Knysna fire a couple of years ago. Many people remember that tragedy. Jan Willem Pell did his PhD and was based on the use of this light collector telescope, and he has contributed an excellent chapter describing this instrument in the book that we have produced on the project, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. Well, after 25 years of very successful observations, light pollution, and more particularly air pollution, once again began to menace the work of the Leiden Southern Station. And in 1978, they decided to move their Southern Hemisphere operations altogether to La Silla in Chile. They took the light collector with them, but they left the other two telescopes on the site. Well, the history of the Southern Station at Hartbeespoort is significant in the overall history of South African science in two ways. The heyday of the Southern Station was at the beginning of the space age. America and Russia were launching satellites, and the detailed study of variable stars that was being done here and elsewhere was providing crucial data on the universe and outer space long before the age of square kilometer arrays and James Webb telescopes. Secondly, the history records a time when South Africa was an important player in international collaboration in several scientific disciplines. That importance declined somewhat over the next few decades, mostly because of apartheid, but of course it is now reviving, and particularly so in the field of astronomy. So the restoration of these two remaining telescopes as historical pieces is really very important. The old technology is also useful for technical training and education. So what is there now to preserve? Well, the 125-year-old Franklin Adams telescope is still in place. It's not functional, it has been neglected, and it's dirty, but it's not seriously damaged. It could certainly be cleaned up and restored and would make a very fine historical exhibit. The Riefler clock, which hangs on the wall next to it on the right of this photograph, may be damaged beyond repair. We're not sure. It's certainly quite severely damaged, but some of the astronomers who have looked at it reckon that it could be repaired and turned into a very useful item, or a very interesting item, because this was the clock that kept the accurate time that was needed for the Franklin Adams telescope to operate across the sky. The Rockefeller twin astrograph is in pretty good condition. It still works, but its wiring needs attention. It would certainly make a very good instrument for technical teaching of aspiring physics and maths and engineering students at Tshwane University of Technology. And Alec Jamison has suggested that interested astronomers might like to brainstorm ideas for making use of the Rockefeller telescope and integrating modern technology to make it more useful and put to practical use. And perhaps this would be a thought worth pursuing with Alec after this meeting, or after our presentation. In addition to the telescopes themselves, there are other interesting things in the buildings there. The picture on the top right shows the blueprints, the actual drawings for the erection of the telescope. They've been left in a cardboard box, which you can see is disintegrated, and they're covered in damp and mildew. And we've taken them out of the building for restoration as soon as we can find funding that can help us do that restoration. It'll have to be done professionally, and I daren't touch them myself until we have a professional looking over our shoulder to help us. On the right, you can see the observing chair used with the Rockefeller telescope, and below you can see an old photograph of Valraven himself using it back in the 1970s. It needs a bit of upholstery, but otherwise quite functional and a very nice old relic of how things were done 50 years ago. There are many other bits and pieces in the building that can be restored and displayed. And then outside, the concrete rails at which the roof of the observatory buildings slide are in bad condition. They're probably even dangerous, and they certainly need to be reconstructed. I don't think that presents any technical difficulties, but of course, money is the eternal problem. The building in which the light collector was housed has been converted into what I'm told is extremely uncomfortable student accommodation for students who go out to Toppieshoek to do the outside team building and entertaining that is done there at the moment. We aren't recommending in our project any active changes to the building. It probably should stay the way it is, but we'll put a plaque on it to say what its fame used to be. So when Leyden left South Africa, the two remaining telescopes were placed under the care of the CSIR. The CSIR handed them to the Department of Education, who gave them to Pretoria Technikon, which then became Tshwane University in 2004. That's when the name changed to Toppieshoek, somewhere in that period. As a university, TUT has the intellectual gravitas to safeguard their heritage value and the specialized teaching emphasis to use them for experimental, or at least for experiential education. And this project is now in their capable hands. Before I hand over to Jane, I just want to say one other thing, and that is about Boyden Observatory at the University of Free State, run by Davie van Jaarsveld. Boyden had quite a similar history to Toppieshoek. Harvard University, in their case, left South Africa at about the same time that Leyden did, and their telescope at Boyden was given to the University of the Free State. UFS has built a superb library and a museum, and they've collected other historical telescopes, and they've made a whole center, an observatory center around the Boyden copy where the telescopes are. And there they hold regular public lectures and outreach programs. And it's an excellent example to which TUT can aspire when we've had sorry, I'm muddling myself, to which TUT can aspire. And we've had very encouraging support from Davie on this project. Jane is now going to tell you about the archaeological site and the remarkable story of how it was discovered.
Well, with that outline of the Leyden Observatory Southern Station and the explanation of the two historically valuable telescopes extant on the property, I'm turning our attention now to the early Iron Age archaeological site and explain the connection between the two. The first person on the screen is Arno van Genderen on the left, a Dutch astronomer who I think is listening to us this evening and who deserves a special welcome. Our correspondence with Arno began when he read Vincent's book, Cradle of Life, that dealt briefly with the two heritage sites. Introducing himself via email, Arno told Vincent that not only was he the resident astronomer from 1971 to 78, but that he was also the discoverer of the early Iron Age site on the property. A lively correspondence has ensued. Arno is still a working astronomer living near Leyden and publishing in the most highly respected journals. He was briefly at the Leyden Southern Station in 1966, and then he arrived in 1971 with his family, his wife Constance and his daughter Linda. He worked mostly on the light collector. He's a very observant person and something of an amateur archaeologist. He selected the site for his house on Toppieshoek a little apart from the other buildings where the ground was relatively undisturbed. And as he said himself, he looked down as well as up. And in doing so, looking down, he saw potsherds and other items on the ground in the vicinity. He had a book entitled Prehistory of the Transvaal, and when he paged through it, he couldn't see any pottery decoration that looked like his findings. So he contacted the author of that book, Revel Mason, shown on the right, an interesting man who, like Arno, was innately curious. Born and schooled in Johannesburg, he completed a BCom in 1949, but he soon abandoned life as an accountant for that as an archaeologist. This better aligned with his love of the South African landscape and his interest in the longue durée of its history. Thus, in 1951, he set off to the University of Cape Town. There was no formal archaeology degree, but UCT was the only university with a full-time staff member in this general field, John Goodwin, in the School of African Life and Languages. Goodwin, a Cambridge and Grenoble graduate, wasn't a formally trained archaeologist, but he was extremely knowledgeable about the Stone Age in South Africa, rock painting, stone tools, and the forager lifestyle. He became Revel's PhD supervisor. When Van Genderen contacted him, Revel was situated at Wits, At first employed by the Archaeological Survey, a state enterprise that Jan Smuts had begun in 1935, and then teaching what were their new courses in archaeology after 1965 in the Department of Geography. And this is Revel's description of his first meeting with Arno van Genderen. I'll read it. In April 1973, a slender, dark-haired Hollander knocked on my office door with a brown paper bag. He was an astronomer at the Leiden Observatory near Hartbeespoort Dam. He opened the bag and poured out a pile of decorated potsherds he'd found near the observatory. Instantly, I recognized the decorations, and I knew that they were over 1,000 years older than those I had found at Olifantspoort. I'd only found one or two in the past. Here he had a whole bag full. Revel wasted no time. He was out at Tobieshoek the very next morning, and he soon began formal excavations, setting up camp. His excitement was due to the fact that this appeared to be the most complete, relatively undisturbed, and earliest Iron Age site in our part of South Africa, a watershed period in our history. By 1952, Revel had defined the Iron Age in South Africa analogous to the use of early, middle, and late for the Stone Age, and he was becoming an expert in all of South Africa's prehistory, as it was called at that time. But perhaps Iron Age doesn't properly encompass the novelties that these Black immigrants brought with them. They were settled farming communities, growing and storing grain, husbanding livestock, and working metal. We're fortunate to have a good photographic record of Revel's excavation at Broederstroom 24/73. That's the name of the farm and the 24th site discovered during 1973. He himself took many photographs, and so did Van Genderen and a number of others. And Arno van Genderen also kindly sent us a fascinating movie of Revel doing this excavation, which we have had digitized. This is an artist's impression of the community at Broederstroom that has been dated to 350 AD by carbon dating and probably lasted for about 200 years. The whole site covers about 2 hectares and was particularly rich and well preserved because of its isolation, its situation and climate, and probably attractive to the new settlers for its proximity to water, to iron ore, to timber, and its temperate climate at the interface of 2 biomes, grassland and savanna. The evidence, and I'm going to show you some of it in a moment, included pottery, hut floors, furnace areas, and iron smelting, beads, figurines, grindstones, granaries, human and livestock bones, and teeth. 12 of the many huts were excavated, each about 2 meters in diameter. This image shows the hut floor area, and on the right, part of the clay cladding that covered a grass lattice roof frame. So the roofs were thatch, covered with a bit of clay cladding. As for iron smelting, 6 furnace areas were uncovered. There were fragments of tires and unsmelted ore. More shale is to be found in the area close to the settlement, and it was probably this that was used by these settlers. One can still pick up pieces of iron slag. A few bits of metal were found all around the site, of course, and a special treasure, a copper chain, although no copper smelting was found on the site. And then about 2,000 interesting stone artifacts littered the site, grindstones for cereals and also for making beads, and including unusual single-grooved stones. You can see one of those on the left, board stones for digging sticks, and soapstone beads and other soapstone objects. And then pottery. About 16,000 ceramic objects were collected and studied. The different decorations are important, and I've put some of them up on the screen, because they give clues to the relationships and traditions between different communities and their movements on the subcontinent. This community produced and stored food. No remains of any cereal were found, although the granaries were, and it would be likely that millet and sorghum were cultivated. Animal bones are abundant, 47 species of animals. This was a pastoral economy, mainly of goats and sheep, and cattle bones were rare, but of course wildlife was quite abundant. There were human remains too, including what is probably the most complete skeleton of the Iron Age era, and a rare pot burial, as is depicted here. The deceased, likely to have been an important person, was first buried in a shallow grave, disinterred after a period of decomposition, and the important bones were collected and reinterred within a ceremonial pot. But there were also Stone Age tools here. Stone Age implements of tortoiseshell, ivory, shells from the Indian Ocean, and worked bone. And this is particularly interesting for interpreting the interaction, perhaps even assimilation, between hunter-gatherers and farmers, or perhaps the latter were themselves working in stone. There's a recent paper on this theme by Justin Bradfield. Right, after a number of years, Mason's excavation was completed. The site was fully described in the South African Journal of Science in 1981, with the plan that's shown on the screen, as well as other publications, of course. The location of what is now the TUT Student Center is at the upper circle. Mason's extensive excavations are to be found immediately on its southern side, and the observatory buildings are within the bottom circle. In 1980, Revel had Broederstroom designated a national monument. It has subsequently been reassigned as a Northwest Province heritage site. On completion, Mason secured the most important localities and had in mind a nature archaeological conservation area that could be visited under supervision and used for education. It's sad to record that by 1988, all the iron protective sheets which had been donated were stolen, and the site was greatly disturbed and overgrown. Revel continued to publicize the site. He was dedicated not only to academia, but also to providing popular information on this topic, particularly to Black school children. He had been influenced by hearing Trevor Huddleston speak while he was at school in 1944, and his own dream was to inculcate this kind of knowledge in all schools and to import pride among Black young people in their country's long heritage. His mission was never accomplished, but not for want of his trying. So Van Gendren's was an incredible discovery, with ramifications for South African politics as well as archaeology, because the date of 350 AD gave the lie to the common belief that Black immigration only occurred from about 1400. It proved that Africans had been settled in South Africa for 2,000 years. In time, other sites like Silverleaves, Leidenburg, Strauss, and those in the Kruger National Park were to provide further proof of early Iron Age settlement. So it's difficult to overstate Toppieshoek's importance for South African history, and the story of its finding by Van Genderen is a truly remarkable one. The site, or parts of it, were reopened in 1990 by Tom Huffman, who died in 2022. An American archaeologist who had been employed by the Historical Monuments Commission of Rhodesia and whose 1974 PhD thesis dealt with the Middle Iron Age group at Leppies-Koppie in that country. In 1977, Huffman was appointed the first professor of archaeology at Wits, and he retired in 2009. His magisterial book, up here on the screen, Handbook to the Iron Age, was published in 2007. So I must mention that Broederstroom is also scientifically interesting because its excavation by Mason occurred on the cusp of a new paradigm in archaeology, of which Huffman was an exponent. Huffman's views turned South African archaeology away from a British sort of view towards an American tradition of what is termed processual archaeology that leant on ethno-historical theory rather than classification. So Huffman was interested in discovering more than artifacts. He sought to uncover the social relations, the worldviews, the beliefs, and rituals of the people. And to this end, he looked for evidence of the central cattle pattern at Broederstroom, and in 1990, he published a paper in African Studies in support of it. So this work has given additional meanings to the site and sharpened some of the interpretive debates within the discipline. And to show you what is there today, the site is again overgrown, but still visible, and in urgent need of careful environmental management, which is a strong discipline at TUT. If you walk around, potsherds, other artifacts, and small bits of iron slag can still be found, and more could be discovered. Importantly, as you will hear, the site itself could yield more information to augment what we know if new technologies and ideas are introduced. I'm going to go back to Vincent now to wind up our presentation and conclude with an overall assessment of the project.
Thanks, Jane. Right, let's take a brief look at what the project has achieved so far. When we started the project, we entered into a memorandum of understanding between the Magaliesburg Association for Culture and Heritage, MAG, and the Tshwane University of Technology. We, under that arrangement, would do the basic assessment research so that we knew what was involved and what was required, and we'd prepare information and we would do the publicity for it as far as we could. And we would make recommendations to the university. Pardon me. On their side, the university would apply for funding, particularly to repair and restore the sites, and that they would undertake when they had the funds. They would use the site for education and research, and they would register the site with the South African Heritage Resources Agency. So on our side, we've completed the project and compiled a report that sets out the benefits to the university, what needs restoring and protection, education and research potential. It includes an extensive bibliography of about 200 publications of papers and books that have been written about this site. We've stated where collaborations are possible with Boyden and with other universities. And we've indicated where outreach opportunities to schools, special interest groups, and so on can be made. That report, incidentally, is available digitally to anyone interested. If you just give me your email, I will mail it to you. We've also published a little book, which I mentioned earlier, for visitors and for anyone who's interested in the site. It tells essentially the story that we're telling in this presentation, but in quite a lot more detail. And it also has that excellent chapter by Jan Willem Pell on the light collector telescope. But it has a lot of data in it, and it's, I hope, a useful record of this project. To get the information for the report and for the book, we enlisted the help of astronomers and people with technical knowledge of telescopes to assess what needs to be done on the telescopes and what was feasible. And that is how we were able to draw the conclusions that we have done. So we've got very good ideas of what's possible, and we hope that Alec Jamison's suggestions that have just come up for a brainstorming session can take this project forward on the telescopes in particular. Then on the archaeological side, Professor Justin Bradfield at the University of Johannesburg has given an enormous amount of his time and expertise to help us with this project. He introduced Dr. Xander Antonitis, an early Iron Age expert from Pretoria University, to the site. And Xander is initiating a field school program covering archaeological surveying, mapping, stratigraphy, and that kind of skills. He's collaborating with Dr. Kathy Zerafos, a lecturer and environmentalist at TUT, who's also taking her students to the site. Xander's also working with a PhD candidate, Tyrone Hopt, and I think Xander is Tyrone's supervisor on his PhD, and they're looking at a range of questions, research questions that can be addressed on the site. And the site is still open to research and still needs a great deal of work to be done on it. So I wish Tyrone well with that project. Mach erected 6 information boards for visitors and students who are walking around the site so that they can understand something of what it indicated. We gave 3 information boards to the telescopes and 3 to the archaeological site. And Mach awarded blue heritage plaques to declare the heritage value of the telescopes and the site. And then this time last year, TUT held a very festive opening ceremony. The Principal and Vice Chancellor, Professor Maluleke, gave a brilliant address on that occasion, and he committed the university to its responsibilities for the site, which is a fantastic thing to have now established. The blue plaques and the information boards were unveiled on that occasion. Choirs sing, or the TUT choir sang, as choirs always do on these sort of occasions. And we mounted an exhibition of the very first artifacts that Arno van Gendering had discovered and which he has now donated back to Wits. These are the artifacts that were in the brown paper bag that Jane told you about and that Revel found so exciting. So these are the very pieces that triggered this whole archaeological investigation in the first place. It's a valuable collection in itself. So good progress has been made, and the project is now in the hands of the Tshwane University of Technology. Funds remain the limiting factor, as always, but TUT have submitted applications to the Heritage Council. They have not been successful so far, but they continue to seek funding from other sources, and we are hoping that some funds will come through eventually and that the project will move ahead as it should. So I'm going to close by just acknowledging all of the people, or as many as I can, of people who have helped us with this project, the astronomers, the archaeologists, the Tshwane University academics and managers, the Mach committee who've helped us so much, and also our thanks to the Royal Society of Johannesburg for having this webinar, and to all of you who have patiently listened to us during our presentation. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry, did I say Royal Johannesburg? Sorry, Royal Society of South Africa, not Johannesburg. Jane's just put me right. Beg your pardon.
Don't worry. Thank you very much for a really interesting and entertaining talk. That was totally enthralling. And I didn't realize, even though I've been...
Because it spreads information about all those sites.
Both of you.
I didn't realize how interconnected it is with a whole lot of other things.
No, they record it.
Are there any questions, please? I'll get the thing back.
Can I, Leslie, can I ask if there are any astronomers listening who might like to get together with Alec Jamison and talk about what could be done with the telescopes?
I'm listening, but I don't have any immediate suggestions.
I'm not sure if I can be heard or not, but
Yes, you can.
I am Alec Jamison, and my email is alec.jamison@telcomsa.net. And I will just add that the Jamison is spelt Jamieson, unlike the whiskey.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alec. Davy van Jaarsveld at Boyden has also suggested that as well as astronomers being involved in whatever happens to this in the future, some sort of astronomy education is needed. You know, Toppy's Hook is used by the students of TUT to go and have fun. And I think that if some of that fun included a little bit of information about astronomy or about archaeology, which neither of those disciplines are taught at that university, I think it would add a dimension to Toppy's Hook and to the university itself if something like that happened. So we're still working on that because they don't employ people in either of these disciplines, but perhaps Xander Antonides, a student, could take students around on the odd weekends, that kind of thing. But one would also, you know, be grateful for an astronomer who is keen on teaching as well as astronomy to do something similar.
There are astronomers at the Hartbeespook Radio Observatory. It's not quite the same sort of astronomy, but they do educational work, and you might be able to get them involved.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. Yes, in the olden days, we were in touch with Marion out there, and I think that's an excellent idea. We'll certainly take that up again. Thank you.
There is a hand up from Floor. Can't read the rest of it. If you could go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry. I was at Hartbeespoort in '75, so it's a bit of a long time ago. There's one thing that I would like to warn you about, and that is the Franklin Adams and the objective there. It's an objective in 3 parts, and it appeared as if the objective wasn't properly aligned when it was moved to Hartbeespoort. And so the plates that were taken while it was at Broederstroom were all of well, considerably less quality than plates before. I think that with today's technology, it should be possible to realign those 3 elements of the objective much better than was possible maybe 50 years ago. So it is certainly something that is both interesting and worthwhile to investigate.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that information, which I didn't know until you've said it. And that certainly presents a nice challenging exercise for someone who has those kinds of skills, because I know that in its day that lens was very famous and highly thought of. So to get it realigned is a wonderful exercise, and I think that's very, very valuable advice. Also, lovely to talk to somebody who was actively involved at the station in the past years. Thank you for contributing.
So you can see it on the plates where the images on the corner become like little aeroplanes rather than nice little dots.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. There's also a hand up from Caroline Ungersbach. Sorry if I've mangled your name. If you could go ahead.
Got that perfectly correct. Yeah, it's Caroline Ungersbach here from the Sustainable Tourism Partnership Program. And we were responsible for doing research for the astrotourism strategy for the Department of Science. And that strategy has now it was presented to Parliament. There's budgets that have been approved on it. And I wonder if this isn't a project that could be approached to the departments, both of the departments of tourism and of science, to maybe get some funding. Yeah, and what we're also wanting to do now is establish astronomy routes, so that we can market astronomy or astrotourism out there to the world. So this would be an interesting site, or these sites would be really interesting for people to be able to come and visit.
Thanks for that, Caroline. I'm very pleased to have met you this way. We've been corresponding with Aletta de Wit on this matter. She's also mentioned the routes and the tourism and everything, but I hadn't known that it had already gone to Parliament and that perhaps TUT could apply for funding in that direction. So may I perhaps contact you and just put you in touch with the TUT people and see what can be arranged, because I think they would be delighted to have the property used more. I don't think it's not high on their list of priorities, obviously. And I think something like this could certainly push it far up the list. Can I get hold of you through sustainable tourism?
Absolutely. I've left my details in the column, in the chat
Super.
column.
Thank you.
So
Thank
my
you very
telephone
much.
number and my email address. So you're welcome to and then we can take and chat further. Because I know where there are funds that are available for infrastructure development and when it comes to this. Okay, good.
That's super. Thank you very much indeed.
Are there any more questions coming up?
Yes, this is Ian Glass here. I'd like to know if any sort of DNA studies have been done to link the original inhabitants of this site with present day populations.
Hello, Ian. Some work has been done, but I don't think it's been extensively done. And what has emerged is that the archaeologists and the ethnologists involved have found it very difficult to find a direct linear continuity between these early Iron Age populations and current South African people, or even with late Iron Age people. So at the moment, they're not saying no, there is no connection, but they haven't actually been able to establish it with any sort of scientific precision. But I do believe that kind of thing is going on, and Xander and Antonitis would certainly be able to answer your question more knowledgeably than I'm doing.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, I can't find the hand on the screen to put it up, so I'm rather barging in. How long has the Hartbeespoort Dam been at that level? And is there likely more evidence down to where the river might have been?
Yes, if I can answer that. The Hartbeespoort Dam was completed in 1923, coincidentally exactly the same year as Robert Innes got his PhD,
yeah.
But that's quite incidental. So 1923, the dam was completed, and it filled up very quickly because that was a year of flood rains, rather like we're having in Gauteng at the moment. It actually reached full capacity that year. But the wall was raised in the 1970s, I think around about 1976. The wall was elevated by another couple of meters, which obviously extended the size of the dam even more. So we've got two dates for the high level mark, the 1923 and then sometime in the mid 1970s. The water nowadays remains fairly much at the same level because what's happening is that Johannesburg is stealing water from KZN, as we all know. They pump it over the Drakensberg and out of the Tugela River basin. And so there's a continuous flow of water that has been through the sewers of Johannesburg and then reaches Hartbeespoort Dam. It's providing environmental difficulties at the dam, but it is keeping the level of the water pretty much constant all the time. In the old days, it used to fluctuate really extensively from the level that you could see in some of those photographs that we've got down to much lower levels. Now it's fairly constant. So I hope that answers your question.
No, I was just thinking whether there were any more buildings or evidence of Iron Age activity, structures.
Yeah, thank you. I forgot you to that part of your very important question. Yeah. No archaeological information is known about, but I would think that it's almost certain, a really good guess, which scientists are not supposed to do, but anyway, that there were fields. We know that there were granaries at the site that that Revel Mason has excavated. So grain was probably grown in the area, and it's very likely that it would have been grown on the floodplain where the soils would have been suitable. So I would think that there is evidence that has been flooded and is not acceptable, not accessible. We also know that some of the modern, well, comparatively, historically modern buildings, the home of the owner, Hendrik Skuman, General Hendrik Skuman, in the old days when the water used to fluctuate, the foundations of his house were sometimes exposed. And I don't think anybody took advantage of those fluctuations to have a look for any archaeological evidence. Now, of course, it would be very difficult indeed. But I'm pretty sure there is some down there, and maybe one day there'll be the kind of technology that we can have a look at it.
Thanks very much for a most interesting lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question, if I may. That pot burial, was that very unusual? Please, thanks.
Leslie, as far as I know, pot burials are they're not unique to the site at all. They are known. They're known elsewhere in Africa, but I think I'm right in saying that only in early Iron Age sites such as this one finds pot burials. In later Iron Age excavations, that's from the sort of 1700s, 1800 period, they didn't seem to use this technique or this ceremonial burial process. So it's I think an indicator of that time. Again, Xander Antonidis is the man to answer that. I don't know if he joined our seminar today, but somebody who's an early Iron Age expert might give you a better answer than I can.
Thank you for that. Are there any more questions? I think just butt in if you've got a question.
Hello, this is Jan Willem Pel. I just wanted to thank Vincent and Jane very much for this great presentation. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful to hear from you.
Yes, nice to hear from you.
I'm so pleased you joined us. Thank you so much.
Okay, if there's
Yes,
no
if
more
I may,
questions.
Martin, how do I stay on the mailing list or whatever it is you use to keep people in contact of this project?
I don't think there is a formal mailing list, but what we can do is Mach has a mailing list, the Magaliesberg Association of Culture and Heritage, and we've got you. I can see your name on the screen, and we could add you to that mailing list. And most of the stuff that is going on would be reported on that to people on that mailing list. So we can do that. And as TUT takes over this project, I'm sure they will develop friends of the project or some associations like that. And I think the number of people will grow that way. But we'll certainly keep your name up on that list, on the Mach list, and make sure that it gets transferred to any new lists that get compiled. Thank you.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Just waiting to see if there's any final comments. There were lots of very complimentary comments on the chat. And if nothing else is coming up, I'd like to say thank you very much again to Jane and Vincent for an amazing talk, which was interesting and entertaining. And yes, it was wonderful. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks for your chairing, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Then I'm going to close the meeting and close down. Thanks very much, everybody. Stay safe.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.